Chapter 7. As Joan waffled, the sound of a car coming up the drive diverted her attention. Delighted for an excuse, she turned to wait for the newcomer to arrive. She squinted into the bright headlights, trying to see if it was Brandon or Ed. She couldn't see the shape or color of the car, but she noticed a column of smoke wafting from the driver's side window. So that would be Ed. She waved, and a hand emerged from amid the haze and gave a jaunty greeting in return. He pulled in beside Beth's sedan and opened up his door. Fast food wrappers cascaded out, and Joan heard a mild curse in a familiar tenor voice. She strode forward to help him clean up and began shoveling the foil and cardboard container back onto the floor of the car, covering the cartoonish five-pointed leaves adorning the black rubber floor mats. Doesn't all this junk tend to get under the pedals? Maybe we should put them on the passenger side, or in a trash bag, she suggested. Nah, it just makes life more interesting. Right, but you might hit someone. Nah. Ed took a drag on his joint and offered it to Joan. About to decline, she glanced in the direction of the house, where she could now hear 3 distinct voices rising in anger, although not quite loud enough to make out the words. Yeah, okay. She brought it to her lips and inhaled deeply, pulling sweet-tasting smoke through her mouth and into her lungs. She didn't smoke often, and it had been a few months since she last had, but she managed to hold it in for a couple of seconds and release it without breaking into a coughing fit. She felt herself relax slightly, her mood elevating just a bit, and she offered Ed the joint again. Nah, you finish it off. I'm good. Joan hesitated, then took another hit. She looked around for somewhere to put it out and settled for rubbing the ember on the red hat of a creepy garden gnome that her father had insisted on placing next to her driveway. She handed the remainder back to Ed, who put it in the pocket of his short-sleeved blue shirt. He showed no signs of noticing the cold, despite lacking a jacket and any extraneous body fat. Joan couldn't help but compare Ed's skinny arms to Brandon's. Ed had a single tattoo on his left wrist, the logo from the Ghostbusters movie. Sounds like a bit of a fracas in there. Shall we join in the fun? Ed headed toward the door, stumbling a little as he journeyed up the 4 steps to the wide porch. Joan grabbed his arm to steady him, and they nearly tumbled over. They looked at each other and burst out laughing. The front door flew open. Beth stood illuminated in the bright doorway, arms crossed, a scowl dominating her face. Do I smell marijuana? She demanded. Joan forced herself to stop giggling. He started it. Beth glowered. Do you at least have the dolly? Let's get this stuff into your lab and get started. Ed pushed past her into the house, ducking his head to clear the doorway. Hey, take a chill pill, Beth. I haven't seen you all in ages. Can't we have a little meet and greet first? Joan followed him inside, stopping short as she noticed Veronica and Derek standing 6 feet apart, staring each other down like cowboys about to draw. Okay, what's all this about? Were you guys yelling at each other? Derek turned toward her, accusation written across his stern face. Veronica has been withholding information. I know that. She was going to share it with us all tonight. She wanted us to have all the facts first. Isn't that right, Veronica? Joan nudged Veronica forward. I have my notes right here. Veronica slapped her notebook into Derek's chest. He grasped it automatically and turned to the front page. No academic could resist a notebook, particularly one that contained data. What's the info you're withholding? Ed asked. Veronica turned toward him with a smile and loaded up another hug into her outstretched arms. Ed, so wonderful to see you. It's been too long. Yeah, for sure, Ed said and hugged her back. Joan saw Veronica wrinkle her nose as she caught a whiff of the smoke cloud that seemed to consistently surround Ed, even with nothing lit up. She stepped back hastily and said, The info is that I have been experiencing sporadic curse symptoms again, and, hey, me too! Everyone in the room froze and then slowly turned toward Beth. She was standing in front of the still open door where she had been loading cases of lab equipment onto Joan's dolly. Her bright smile faltered as she took in their stares. What? Derek stepped toward her, his eyes narrowing. You didn't think to share this with me before? Perhaps online or in the 2 hours we just spent in the car together? Plus, weren't you guys just arguing about it a second ago? Ed said. Beth shrugged. I didn't hear what Veronica said before, and when I had the, symptoms or whatever, I thought I was just having an episode. I have episodes sometimes, I didn't think it was curse-related until just now. But if you're having them too, that's what it must be. Joan shook her head. No, I heard 3 voices outside while I was shouting. 3 voices shouting while I was outside. What were you fighting about, if not that? Derek sneered. I was yelling at Veronica for not telling me about this. Veronica was yelling at me for yelling at her, and Beth was yelling at Veronica for baring her midriff. Joan wondered if she was going to need some kind of facial brace with all of the eye-rolling she was doing. It couldn't be healthy. Beth, have you ever considered minding your own business? Beth stepped toward her, finger wagging. Now you listen here. Derek sharply clapped his hands twice for attention. This bickering is just distracting us from the issue at hand. Has anyone else gotten any kind of curse-related symptoms? Joan and Ed shook their head. Just the reaction I felt when I saw the key, Joan said. That's just the first time I saw it, and Brandon had the same. I haven't shown it to anyone else yet. Right. As you requested, I have some supplemental measuring devices so we can run further tests. Oh, hey, I brought some stuff too, Ed chimed in. From my ghost hunting. EMF detector, pendulum, stuff like that. It's not super high-tech, but it's not Walmart crap either. It's out in the car. Mrs. Olson wasn't a ghost, Beth pointed out. What good is that stuff going to do? You can get ghost hunting gear at Walmart? Joan asked. Not good gear, Ed shrugged. Derek put up a hand to forestall any more questions. It never hurts to definitively rule out any unlikely scenarios. Thank you for thinking of that, Ed. Well, it's all I got, you know. I'll grab it. He disappeared through the front door, brushing past Beth as she rolled the dolly into the house, staggering under its weight. Okay, where is all of this going? Follow me. You sure you got that? Without waiting for a response, Joan picked up one of the 2 remaining boxes and led the way through the living room into the kitchen and out the back door. She noted that someone, probably Sadie, had cleaned up the dinner dishes and put the food away. Sadie or her kids had also turned on the many strands of fairy lights she had strung between the house and the lab, and the yard was brightly lit. She picked her way down the rickety wooden steps carefully, the bumpy surface of the case continually trying to slide through her fingers. She heard laughter and looked to her right, where she could see Sadie's twins tossing a stick for an enthusiastic Willow. In the lab, she saw Sadie herself busy with something on the table in front of the window. Behind her, Beth grunted with each thump as she maneuvered the hand truck down the 3 stairs. Joan turned as she heard a wail. No! She jumped to catch the boxes as the entire column wavered and swayed. They pitched forward. She blocked their fall with her back, knocking the breath from her lungs in one great big whoosh, frantically juggling her own case between her outstretched arms and miraculously managing to keep it from falling too. Better lighten that load, she advised breathlessly as she leaned back against the dolly, struggling to retain her grip. The walkway is gravel. Derek stood to the side, arms folded, and observed, as Joan and Veronica each added another small case to their burdens, lessening the weight on the dolly for Beth to lug the rest of the way. He followed them, unladen, down the path into the small, brightly lit lab, where Sadie was setting out drinks and arranging a display of sliced meats, fruit, and cheeses on the card table. Oh, sweetie, this looks wonderful. Veronica beamed and popped a grape into her mouth. This looks unnecessary. Derek frowned at the open wine bottle and last night's rum. The blender and daiquiri mix had gone back to the kitchen. And drinking while working is completely inappropriate. Remove the alcohol from this laboratory at once. Joan snorted. If you think I'm going to work with you without drinking, you are sorely mistaken. She picked up the rum and shook it at him as Ed entered with an assortment of small instruments packed in tattered plastic gallon-sized freezer bags. My lab, my rules. The booze stays. Sadie smirked at Derek and lifted her wineglass over her head. Woo! Let's get this party started. Don't mind if I do, said Ed, snagging the rum from Joan and unscrewing the lid. He took a large swig, and Joan gave him a broad grin and a high five. Derek crossed his arms and glared. Where is the key? Joan pointed to a small silver-colored box sitting in splendid isolation in the center of the lab table. It's in there. Listen, we have to be careful about this, though. That may be the first sensible thing you've said so far. He gestured at her to continue. We only have one chance to measure each person's reaction. I've already seen it. No one else here has. So we need to pick the first subject, get them hooked up to whatever sensors we have, and then everyone else leaves the room so they're not compromised. Then we put it away before we bring in the next person. An excellent plan. Derek picked up one of the lighter boxes, carrying it to the table and opening it to reveal a wired helmet with connected sensors, similar to the one Joan had. I will go first so that I can assist with the subsequent tests. Sadie and Veronica haven't seen it? Joan shook her head. Just me, and Brandon. She glanced at her phone. 7:30. He should be getting off work about now, so he'll be here soon to help out. Derek nodded. Okay. You and he will handle the setup for my testing. He strode to the jumble beside the door and indicated another box. We will want this one as well. Beth, please put this on the table. He gestured to 2 more cases. And that one, and that one. Everything else can be stacked neatly out of the way. Derek returned to the table to supervise, waiting for Beth to lug over the heavy containers. Sadie pushed a finger into his chest. Do you maybe want to help out too? He waved a hand in dismissal. Beth is a strong, independent woman. She is perfectly capable of Get off your lazy ass and pick up a box, Sadie roared, swinging her arm around to point at the stack. You might be a big shot in London, but around here everyone pulls their own weight. Damn straight, muttered Joan, opening up a case as Derek reluctantly joined the others in arranging the rest into tidy towers. It held a smooth, dull gray metal box, rectangular, with a square hole in one end. She peeked inside and saw a sloping lens. What does this one measure? Derek looked up. It will scan for energy fields around the body, sort of like a primitive MRI. We'll set it up to take continuous photos throughout the experiment, so it'll be a progression we can watch like an animated film. He indicated the machine he was working with. This one is for measuring heart rate and brain waves, and it will also show the electrical current, so we don't need to use your machine at all. Veronica nudged Joan aside. We use one of these at the yoga studio for aura photography. I can hook it up. Thank you, Veronica. Ed, would you set up your equipment as well? Beth, I'm sure they could use some assistance. Directions given, Derek opened up his laptop, perching on a stool at the table. Brandon's voice drifted in from outside. Hey, Marlon, aren't you a little young to be smoking? What? Sadie shrieked and raced outside, shoving past Brandon as he ambled in, a mischievous grin on his face. Joan raised an eyebrow at him. Marlon is smoking? Of course not. Brandon slipped an arm around Joan's waist and aimed his lips at hers. With a glance toward Derek, Joan stepped out of his embrace and evaded his kiss, busying herself at the snack table. No point in making the guy even grumpier than he already was. Cheese? She offered. She looked up and found Brandon and Derek engaged in a glaring contest. She thrust a glass of wine and a slice of cheddar into Brandon's hand, widening her eyes and raising her eyebrows at him in a universal sign to just be cool. Derek emitted an explosive sigh and returned his attention to his computer. Sadie marched back in, heading directly to Brandon and smacking his arm. You are such an asshole. Sorry. He sipped his wine and set the cheese back down on the platter. Beth paused in her setup to remove the sullied cheddar and toss it into the garbage can next to the table, grimacing in distaste. You are not. Sadie grinned and bounced off to set up her own station. She worked in a hospital lab and would be drawing blood before and after each test to observe any changes within. Derek looked up from his screen. If you have quite gotten the shenanigans out of your system... Yeah, hi, Derek. Nice to see you, too. The shenanigans are out. What are we working on? Hi, Veronica, Ed, Beth. Beth briefly glowered in his direction before returning to her task, propping one of Ed's instruments onto a tripod. Veronica smiled warmly, and Ed gave a quick salute. Joan quickly explained the plan. Brandon pitched in to get everything ready, and Derek hooked up to the various sensors. It was all very efficient and serious, and there were no shenanigans at all, except for one minor one, where Sadie spilled a teensy bit of wine on something she was setting up for Ed, but it turned out okay because it was just a pendulum and not anything electronic. Joan had a close call when she tripped over a cord, and Brandon caught her before she fell, but she managed to twist at the last minute, so he only grabbed her arm and not her rear. Really just a caper, not a shenanigan at all. Barely more than an antic. About 20 minutes later, everything was ready. Derek was plugged into more machines than Darth Vader at his charging station, and there were still more instruments pointed at him. Joan sat behind the laptop, observing the levels of everything from brainwaves and heart rate, normal, to ghost activity, none. Okay, everyone who hasn't seen the key, go away. Brandon opened the door and with a wave of his arms shooed the group out into the yard. He shut the door with a thud and swept the window curtains shut. He turned back to Derek. You ready? Derek nodded once, curtly. Brandon grabbed the box with the key and lifted the lid. Keeping his body hunched over the box to conceal his actions, he shook it out into his hand and turned, holding his closed fist in front of Derek. He opened his fingers, bearing the brass key.